You may have seen her in Glamour, Vogue, Business Insider, or even Dateline, but today's guest, Meggie Palmer, has been a woman on the money for a very long time. A founder, a speaker, a journalist, Meggie has been asking the hard questions around getting women paid and promoted faster. As the founder of Pep Talk Her, Meggie has been inviting women into the conversation around getting the pay gap closed in their own life and providing them with the resources to do so, which is why we are so honored to have Meggie here today to talk about self-worth, getting paid, and of course, pep talking one another. Meggie, thank you for being here.
Thanks for hosting me. I'm stoked. This is going to be a fun conversation.
Absolutely. Ladies, please introduce yourselves.
I'm Sonia, and I'm calling in from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Hi, I'm Sabrina. I'm calling in from Orlando, Florida.
Hi, I'm Nishita, and I'm calling from New York, New York.
So just to get started, Meggie, you've got such good energy in this space that can sometimes feel like challenging and like a long fight. What inspires you around the conversation about women's worth and the pay gap today?
Possibility for change is what inspires me. And also the fact that we know that when women have more money, awesome things happen in the world, right? Like we pay that forward, we create change, lifting women to a place where they're wealthy allows us to also pay that forward to help lift other women out of poverty and to really, what I'm excited about is this concept of like small ripples turning into tidal waves of change. That's what inspires me. And that's what, keeps me motivated. Because honestly, if you kind of sit with the statistics of how bad the gender gap is, you would never get out of bed. Like it's a depressing situation, make no mistake. And so, I really try and focus on I don't want to call it positive, I guess possibility. Let's focus on the possibility, I would say.
Unlocked really tries to focus on worth at the most personal level, right? And this idea that before we can get to external change in our lives, the change has to first start internally. What has been your journey with respect to your self-worth, Meggie, and your relationship?
I guess I feel very lucky because, my parents from a very young age instilled in us a sense of self-confidence, and my mom was very careful to reduce the number of gender stereotypes that we were exposed to as children. And of course they exist. And of course, the fact that we're even having this conversation, by the way, I want to make it really clear, like none of this is our fault. We have been socialized in a certain way. There are messages that come at us left, right, center, up, down, all day, every day from the day we are born that tell us that certain things are normal, that certain things are for girls or for boys. And so there's all these, entrenched biases that we all hold. And so now that, thankfully we're having these conversations where we're trying to shift those entrenched patterns that are not equitable, that are not serving us. It's really hard because we've been seeing these things from a young age. And so for a lot of us, these are entrenched habits, and so mom, one of the things that she did, like we very rarely saw mom wear makeup. So it was never something like I'm not a big makeup gal. And like I was, I spent 15 years as a foreign correspondent on TV and as part of television journalism, unfortunately, your looks are apparently somewhat important. And I didn't know how to brush my hair. Like I just was just like, this is just not even my work. I was like, I love TV because you got out of the office and you met people, but I didn't know that you had to I didn't know how to blow dry your hair. I'd never owned a hair straightener because I didn't know that's what was important. And so that's, I'm kind of grateful to my folks for that because from a young age, like we were, as I said, there were still messages that we were given, but she really, and my dad, I think intentionally tried to strip away as much as they could some of those subliminal messages that little girls and little boys grow up seeing in the household, So in many ways, they probably gave me a head start because my self-worth has really never been pegged to aesthetics. It's always been something that I have felt from a young age, not that I've controlled, but I think, again, my folks gave me a great bedrock of like, you're okay the way you are in control of what goes forward and you have the capacity to do whatever your heart desires. And I know that kind of sounds corny, but it's something that I reflect on now when I think about raising my son is like, how can I instill that in him, but also instill a sense of responsibility in him to make sure that he empowers other folks in the world to feel that sense of confidence and peace within themselves,
Women's worth and women's pay have been closely connected topics in conversation. How do you differ self-worth from what people will pay you for a job or a service?
One of the things that I think about when it comes to, the value of your work in the workplace and how that's compensated. And this is a mentor of mine helped me understand something that I said a lot and I never really realized that I was saying, and he helped me unpack this. I'd said to people for a long time, the reality is that your worth in the market in terms of compensation is truly unlimited. Truly. Like if we look at the billionaires in the world, particularly the male ones, there is no limit for them. There is no limit. Absolutely not. And so why should there be a limit for anyone listening in today? For any folks in the world, truly, why should there be a limit? Like in theory, there's not. And any limit that arbitrarily exists is because it's a limit that we have had imposed from those messages, or a limit we're imposing on ourselves. And so one of the things that I say a lot in the Pet Talker community is that people pay the price that you put on yourself. You get to decide that price tag. Make no mistake, people pay the price you put on yourself, and your price is different from my price because your experience is different from my experience. And I might value that differently to how Suzanne values that, to how Tom values that. It's all in the eye of the beholder. And frankly, for better or worse, it's also it also comes down to how you communicate that worth, and specifically how you communicate your value. So I'll give you an example. I had a one-on-one executive coaching client the other day, very experienced in the foreign affairs realm. And she did a project for a very large organization, which shall remain nameless. And it only took her 2 or 3 hours. So she was like, it was an easy project. I was happy to do it for a friend. Now, this is a multi-million-dollar corporation. And I was like, that's like a big deal. Like what you did, you got them a meeting with the foreign minister. Like this is like a kind of, you called in some big favors and that has a huge price. She was like, yeah, but it only took me a couple of hours. I was like, yes, but the value of that for you, it was 2 or 3 hours of, tinkering while you watch Netflix. For this organization, that is game changing. That will lead to multi-million-dollar procurement contracts. And so you can see how for her, the value was kind of easy because it didn't take her much time. But for them, that value was in fact exponential. So value is really in the eye of the beholder. And I think that's the same when it comes to like what you believe you're worth in market. And so I always say to people, like, you need to really do those internal gymnastics of really focusing on that inner work before you go in and have these compensation negotiations, because it will set you up for so much more success.
Maggie, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that what you said was so poignant about how it's like so self-inflicted. I had a manager, if you will, and they asked me for this impossible feat, and they gave me an impossible deadline. And it was literally like, do this or you don't have a job. It was very much dramatic and absurd and ridiculous. But I got it done, right? Like I would not take no for an answer. I got the task done. And I got it done in sooner than later. And it was beautiful. It was like, your magnum opus moment. But then I had to realize, like, she was like, well, see, you guys always try to convince me that what I'm asking for is impossible. And clearly it's not, because look. And I said, no, I'm not convincing you that what you're asking for is impossible. What I'm convincing you of is that it took a special person like me to pull it off, and to pull it off in the time in which I did, and the eloquence in which I did, and the seamlessness in which I did. That took skill, and not everybody has that. Everybody might have the recipe, but not everybody can make my sauces. And that's just the honest, authentic truth of it. And so I think your worth has to come from that special place inside of realizing, like, hey, like I am pretty great and impressive, and I should be commanding these dollars, and I never look back. And so I think it's just a constant reminder to self of like, just because it's easy for me doesn't mean it's easy for the next person, doesn't mean I shouldn't be getting what I deserve and getting what I'm worth and hitting people over the head a little bit for my coins, because I deserve every single last one of them. And so I think that's just important for women to just remember that.
100%.
So getting a little bit more granular here, I want people who are listening to this to be like, okay, I got the mindset, I got the sauce. I'm thinking about the Beyonce, like hot sauce in my bag swag, right? Like I've got the sauce, I'm ready. I'm out of contemplation. I'm ready for action. Meggie, I know Pep Talk Her does amazing work helping women have these conversations. Let's start with you. How were your expectations around compensation shaped?
My expectations were shifted by observing what the blokes around me did, honestly, which I mean, like maybe that's a bad thing, but you know what? Actually, now that I reflect on it, I had a female boss early on in my career as a journalist, and she was amazing. She was like, hey, Meggie, you should really ask me for a raise. And I was like, what? And she was like, hey, let's have a chat about your compensation. And I was like she really had to lead a horse to water. Like I was really young and I was naive and I was like, oh no, I'm kind of bored in my job. But instead of like trying to do something about it or talk to my boss, I started Googling other jobs, which was like dumb. I should have had that conversation. And so she was kind of teaching me like, it is your job to come and talk to me. Like, do not sit there and wait for your boss to just come to you and be like, Meggie, you're amazing. Like, let me give you some more money. No, like, I wish that for all of y'all listening, and I hope that for you. But the reality is your bosses are busy. They've got stuff going on. They've got other direct reports. They're getting divorced. Their kids are sick. They're like, they got Netflix to watch, you know? Like, it's kind of your responsibility to be like, hey, and this is what Pep Talker is all about. This is what the free Pep Talker app does, is it tracks your success. So you can be like, hey, listen, the last 12 months, let's talk about my wins. I've increased our website clicks by 13%. Our ROI per customer is up 6% year on year. And I've hired 3 staff members directly, so we haven't paid for recruiting costs. With that in mind, I'd love to discuss my compensation. You know, so like coming to the table with data and being proactive. And, you know, it's that first boss, Kathy, who's still a dear friend and mentor of mine, who really taught me, you gotta step up yourself and not wait for it to be given to you.
Yeah, when I was thinking about this, I feel like a lot of it, and maybe this is cultural, but there is a humility that is expected when it comes to compensation or worth. Like regardless of your qualifications, your CV, you're expected to come in being humble about it. Mm-hmm. And honestly, why? Like to your point, if you did the work, you did the work, and you should be proud about it and you know, rightfully get compensated for it, you know, based on the different levels and different benchmarks. And I think it also comes from the transparency. You don't even know, like the same position that I'm in, someone could be getting paid, you know, a lot more, but how would I know that? So how would I even know to ask? I might feel that I'm, you know, doing the best or producing, but to your point, Meggie, like once you have that confidence in yourself to even ask or to know like what is reasonable or that benchmarking to kind of support that data that you're bringing to the conversation, I feel like that's so important. And you're seeing the change with transparency laws and different initiatives that are helping to you know, to make it more equitable. But it's that knowledge is so, and maybe I'm biased as a person that loves data, but it's not only data on you, but it's also, you know, when you come with all of those statistics, like you can't, there's no way to refute it. You did the work, you know that you should be getting paid more. And so what is your boss going to say? Like, I don't have the budget. It's like, well, that's fine. So you know what? Your competitor does. So I'm going there. So I think that's really, it is, I feel like there is something nice about being humble and being a team player, but it is also like, why not? If you don't ask, you're never going to get it.
What you're talking about, Meggie and Nishita, is like the aha moment, right? And you had that aha moment that was created when your manager was like, hey, wink, wink, like, why don't you talk to me about compensation? You know, ask me for a raise. And you're talking about the aha moment, Nishita, in sort of a more macro way, which is like seeing the data and saying like, oh, aha, like that's available in this range. What was the aha moment that caused you, Meggie? And maybe it was the conversation you had with your boss, but did you have another one that caused you to change your expectations around compensation? And if so, what was it?
You know, I think one thing, you know, I want to get to the aha moment. And I also want to acknowledge in all of these conversations, when we're talking about unconscious bias, when we're talking about messages from the press and the gender pay gap in general, the gender pay gap sucks. You know, we know that it sits around 20% more or less, depending on which country's data you look at in the Western world. But those statistics and those data points are a million times worse for women of color, you know, truly. And I think that it's really important to acknowledge that, that these are challenges that all of us have a responsibility to fight for, to make it easier and a better place for the next generation of folks coming after us. So I just really want to acknowledge the data and how bad it is, and how it actually gets worse depending on the marginalization of groups throughout history. When I think about the aha moment, and I'm hoping that some of the listeners today have had that experience, when sometimes you ask for something and someone says yes, and you're like, oh, it kind of gives you the confidence to be like, wait, I can actually do this. I don't know if anyone's done this. You ring a credit card company and you're like, hey, MX, like, I love using my fancy card. How do you feel about maybe refunding that annual fee? Like 9 times out of 10, they'll do it. Or if they won't, they'll actually credit you that number of points to your account. So hot tip, give that a red hot go. But, I like people to practice in low consequence situations, like your credit card company, like your cell phone company. Give them a call and ask for a discount, because it's in the asking, and then the fact that it doesn't really matter if they say yes or no. That's actually really powerful, because it teaches our brain it's okay to ask. It's okay to ask, and it's okay for someone to say no. But that doesn't mean that you can't still ask, and it's the same when it comes to compensation at work or going for a promotion or a new role. You can put your hat in the ring. Sure, why not? Like, they might say no, and that's okay, because then you can get feedback. And all of this communication and this dialogue is really like leading you to the next step, and it's giving you information that you can then act on, So my aha moment is every time I ask and I get told yes, that's like an aha moment in and of itself. And even when I get told no, that's a learning moment.
So I want to pivot slightly, because I do think that Meggie's point around like different groups of women can even have different experiences. And we do know that one of those groups actually is mothers. The equal pay day for mothers is actually in September. The earliest payday in the year is in March. So that means that by becoming a mother, women are penalized to the point that they do not make what a man makes until September of the following year. And I wanted to ask you, Meggie, to what degree do you think that a woman's parental status, mother versus non-mother, impacts her perception of self-worth?
I think for me, the question is less about self-worth and more about the motherhood penalty, right? Which statistically we know exists. It's just like, let's just add that to the list of things that happen. So we know that in the year after a birthing parent gives birth, that the gap in terms of the pay, it widens, right? And in fact, if you're looking at a heterosexual couple, the earnings gap in that first 2 years between the birth of the child and then 2 years after, that pay gap doubles, right, between the two folks. So it's a significant penalty that mothers face. And in fact, you would assume that maybe there's a fatherhood penalty. And I actually have heard anecdotally some stories recently of folks taking parental leave and being discriminated against on their return to work. But I will say the evidence tells us that there's actually a suggestion of a fatherhood bonus, believe it or not, in which, their earnings are more likely to go up, because it's sort of seen as like, well, you're a parent and like you're so credible, etc. But in fact, we know that hiring managers are less likely to hire mothers, right, as compared to women who don't have children or caring responsibilities. So this motherhood penalty is something that is enormously worrying. And until we fix the childcare gap, and again, until we can change that systemic unconscious bias, unfortunately, it's probably going to be sticking around for a while. So we need drastic change, because it's got to be closed, right? This motherhood penalty, it's not acceptable, it's not okay, and we've got to do something about it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. As someone who has 3 children, I've been through this 3 times. And I can tell you that every single time that I had a child, there were significant penalties. And you felt like you were being punished. Like, it's personal. Like, it's like, I feel attacked. Like, why am I in this HR office fighting with you about the fact that you forgot to file the paperwork to add my child onto the benefits? This is crazy, but I'm here fighting with you. I did all of the things that I was supposed to do. I've done all the things that you've demanded of me. I sent them from my hospital bed, mind you, and you still haven't done your jobs, sir. But I'm being penalized now. You know what I mean? Like, it just, and every single time. And then there was times where I know that I was actually like coming back into work. And when I come back into work, it's not always like rainbows and kittens. It's like, oh, well, welcome back. And it's like, how you doing? And it's like, as you fight back your postpartum tears of like, I'm fine, except I'm not, because I only had 6 weeks off because you guys don't pay for after, postpartum leave. And, like, nobody has maternal leave and it's terrible. We live in a country here in the US where you are mandating women to have babies. You don't create a system that supports them. And then you get mad at them. You want them to work, but you don't want to support them when they work, but you don't want to support them when they don't work. It's the most awful catch-22 that there could possibly do. And I think like the message that gets sent is like that you are less than. You're a mother and you are less than because like you have these implicit reasons why you may be distracted. My last job that I took before my current situation, they were like, oh, how old is you have a new baby. Oh, okay. How old is your baby? Oh, months. Oh, that must be really overwhelming. Well, do you think you'll be able to handle? And it's like, please don't worry about my child. My child is fine and I'm fine and all the things are fine. And I'm not here to talk about that, but that's something that just mothers have to deal with all of the time. And it's a sad reality. So I think the messaging, especially in the United States, that gets sent is that mothers get penalized and women's careers suffer from motherhood. And it's the sacrifice that we make to have children. Or you have a lot of women now who are making the choice to not have children because they're like, you know what? I worked hard. I work hard for these here degrees and for this here lifestyle and for these things. And you know what? I will be the rich auntie of their dreams. I will walk in and let the cash befall, but I'm not signing up for it anymore because it's antiquated and it doesn't suit what I want for my happy, because I think that the world has kind of taken a big crap on the motherhood thing. So I think it's created like these two very opposite roads of like, there's women who suffer and do their penance of being moms and you suffer for that. Or there's the women who are like, nah, I'm good. I'm not suffering. I'm not gonna, give up my career for that. And it's sad that it's a either or, it's not an and that's unfortunate.
And the real sad part is that they're all getting underpaid. So, that's the biggest irony. So Meggie, I want to talk to you a little bit about the most valuable support that a woman has provided you in really helping you with respect to, knowing your worth, and would love to hear like any anecdotes, because I sometimes think us hearing these stories, we benefit, right? Like we benefit just by association and then thinking it happened for you, but maybe it could happen for me, or maybe I can show up in that way for someone else.
Think about, there's so many examples of like, I remember, this is so embarrassing, when I was a young journalist, they had a wardrobe department and they like had bought me a new suit because I was from a farm and had no idea. Anyway, so I had this suit on, and when you get a fancy suit and there's like a big like square label on the edge of the jacket hem, like where it hits your hand, and I just thought that was like part of the brand. I was like, oh, this is just like a fashionable. So I was like walking around the newsroom. I was like, got my fancy suit on, and I had basically the tag on, but because it was like sewn on. So I just thought it was cool and fancy. And like one of the news anchors, she was like, honey, like you need, like, let's go to the bathroom. And I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, do you like my new suit? She's like, yeah, you got the tag on. I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, no, that comes off. I was like, isn't it part of the suit? Like it shows the fancy brand. She's like, no, honey, no, that comes off. And I was like, mortified. I've been walking around the office for like 7 hours. But like that was an act of kindness. And even little things like when I was young and junior, they would like give me their hand-me-down jackets when I couldn't, like I was on like 28 grand a year, couldn't afford to have new clothes. And so they would like give me their old clothes or their old beauty products, which like honestly, as a 21-year-old, I was like, this is like heaven. This is Christmas. So little like acts of kindness like that, or like telling me like, just little things like that, or like don't go on the road with that camera operator because he's basically a sex pest, like all these things, like alarm bells, like don't do this, like because you're young and naive, like just kind of helping you navigate all of the things. So from being very young all the way through to now to starting your own business and the mental health and anxiety challenges that have come with that along the way of feeling overwhelmed and people being like, you can do it, here's my bookkeeper, let me promote this for you, just like acts of kindness are everywhere. And I find, I'm Australian and I moved to New York 6 years ago, and folks here are just like, of course you have a business, what else are you doing? And of course, like everyone just sees the possibility. And I think, those small conversations, and perhaps they are not a heavy lift for the other party, but when you hear that, And when you hear that on those moments when you really need to hear it, it's so kind and generous. Those small acts of kindness go such a long way.
One of the things that I think is sometimes discussed is that women not supporting other women. We know the famous quote about there's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women. And I was just wondering if you had any experience with women not encouraging you or even discouraging you from making bigger asks. And how did you, in your case, like deflect that advice and not let it, cloud your judgment or internalize it? Or maybe you did. And if you could talk to us a little bit about that.
The way I deal with folks like that, I just sort of I feel sorry for them. That's how I choose to handle it. I'm like, oh, they must be so sad in themselves, or they must have had something so terrible happen to them that they feel it's better to make me feel bad. And that makes me sad for them. And so for me, it's just like, that's how I cope with it. I feel sorry for them. And so then I try and bless them. My mum told me that when I had an acrimonious split from a former employer. She's like, you have to bless them and let it go. And I tried to remember that it's not always easy. And there's a lot of anger at times. But I really, when I can, I'm just like, oh, that's sad for them. And then it just makes it easier. I don't know if that's just me, but that makes it easier for me to process.
Meggie, I know we're at the end of our time here, so I'm going to just ask one last question that we ask of all of our guest speakers, which is, what happens when everything in your life is a reflection of your self-worth?
It's my hope for everyone listening today is that what can happen to everyone here today, and let's just vision into the future. What could happen? What might happen if you and your life and your work, the work-life balance you have was a reflection of how your best friend sees you, of how your biggest cheerleader at work sees you, of how your sister, your mom, your grandma, your aunt, the people who love you most in your life, if your life reflected what they thought of you and how much they loved you, valued you, and respected you, that's what I would love everyone listening to aspire to, because I think often it's easy to see our own flaws, and we all know our flaws better than anyone else does. And so it can be easy. Our brains have a negative bias, right? We're hardwired to focus on those negative things, but let's like disobey what our brain naturally wants to do. And let's flip the script. Let's start to live the life that we know that our ancestors would have loved us to live, that we know that the folks who love us, who really respect us and who want us to succeed, let's live that life, because I want that for you all. And I see that as unlimited potential. It's possible for everyone here, finding work that you actually love, working for people who do respect you and who value your opinions. It's possible. I know sometimes when you're somewhere toxic, it doesn't feel like that, but I'm here to tell you and to give you permission to know that it is possible. So let's start transitioning towards that exciting future you situation.
Maggie, I love that. I want to raise a glass to you in the tradition of unlocked.
A mug.
Yes, a glass, a mug, whatever you want. We just want to say thank you so much for reminding us of our worth, for reminding us that it is unlimited, as is our value, and that we should be paid accordingly. Cheers to you.
Cheers, y'all. Keep in touch.